Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Wanderlust Wednesdays. We decided to take you on a spin, a dazzling spin around the globe. We're going to talk about a lot of different itineraries that Viking offers because we're talking about museums around the globe. And obviously, these are museums that you can visit on itineraries that we offer, on voyages that we do with you. And we're going to dive right in. We're going to start just a quick roundup of what we do in Europe on our river cruises. So we'll be talking about Paris, we'll be talking about Normandy, Berlin, Spire in Germany, Porto in Portugal, Lisbon in Portugal, and Amsterdam. And for the Portugal part, I have Leah da Silva here. She's my right hand here in the Viking Basel office, and she is from that part of the world. So it would behoove me to give her the microphone when we're talking about her country. Right after Portugal, I'll be talking again because then we're going into the Netherlands, and that's where I'm from. And then after that, we will take you on some ocean voyages. And that's Bangkok in Thailand, Stockholm, Oslo, Tromso in northern Norway, Rome, Florence, and finally Athens. And then at the end, you can ask any question you may have, and we'll try our very best, Leah and I, to answer them. Let's get started with Paris. And in Paris, of course, there are an awful lot of museums. We decided to highlight the Musée d'Orsay. And what you see here on the Seine is a train station. This was the Gare d'Orsay. And that was converted eventually into a museum. And it doesn't just have the world's best collection of Impressionism. It has a lot of other things as well. It's a beautiful museum. You would do well, if you have a lot of time in Paris, to purchase a Paris card. The secret with that card is that you can enter the museum and you can cut through all the lines. And the card is worth it if you have a little bit more time. If you book an extension with us, if you are there just for half a day, then you might just want to get a ticket because then the cost of the card becomes a little excessive compared to what it is that you get for just the Musée d'Orsay. James, I think we have a little video teed up that speaks about the Impressionists and why they were so important in the France just before the turn of the century.
With their intense hues and visible brushstrokes, Impressionist paintings today are beloved around the world. But in the 1860s, when the movement began, they were ridiculed. It was a time when the Académie des Beaux-Arts was the exclusive arbiter of French painting, and the only paintings accepted were meticulously painted canvases with no visible brushstrokes, depicting historic and religious subjects or portraits. Around the same time, two young artists, Monet and Renoir, began painting real-time in the open air. Here they developed a novel style to capture the changing effects of light on the landscape. Year after year, their radical paintings were rejected by the Académie. Then, in 1874, Monet and Renoir bypassed the Académie and exhibited their work together with Pissarro, Cézanne, and Degas in an independent collective. Critics denounced them, denigrating them as the Impressionists, implying that their paintings were at best mere sketches. Though meant to disparage, the term instead gained favor with the public, who began to see Impressionist art as a sign of change and progress. From that first exhibit, the Impressionists went on to show their work 8 more times over the next 12 years, gaining support from the public and even eventually the Académie. Monet's Rouen Cathedral series is considered the height of Impressionistic achievement. And his water lily series, painted in his Giverny garden, remains amongst the most recognizable of the genre. By the 1890s, Impressionism was a symbol of modern French life, paving the way for post-Impressionist masters Van Gogh, Matisse, and others. When you're in France, bring Impressionism to life by tracing Monet's footsteps in Rouen and strolling his beautiful Giverny gardens. Exploring Paris's Musée d'Orsay, one of the world's most important collections of Impressionist paintings. Or discover Impressionism's legacy in the Provençal city of Arles, forever immortalized by Van Gogh in his tortured, vivid, and hauntingly beautiful canvases.
Okay, so that was the Musée d'Orsay, and this, of course, is the pyramid in front of the Louvre. That pyramid was done by an American architect, I.M. Pei, who built a lot of skyscrapers all over the US, but is probably best known for the pyramid. A little word of advice. So the Louvre is a former royal palace, and it became this repository of art from all over the world. France obviously was a colonial power at one point and collected things from their former colonies, had an enormous artistic output itself also over hundreds of years. So it is a vast, vast museum. What you need to do is don't try to see all of it. Spend a little bit of time preparing. The Louvre has a perfect English-speaking website, and figure out what it is that you can do in a certain amount of time that you have there. You can also do it as part of a tour that we offer, which is a guided tour of the Louvre, and that already takes care of the problem of trying to see it all, in that your guide will take you to the highlights and skip through the parts that you just don't have time for. If you try to see it all, you're going to end up being frustrated. So that's about the Louvre and about the Musée d'Orsay. You can see Paris on our river cruise itineraries primarily. There are a few ocean cruises that touch on Le Havre, and then from there you can travel to Paris. But mostly, because it's on the Seine, it's a river cruise. For us, Paris is a river cruise destination, primarily, of course, with the Paris in the Heart of Normandy itinerary, also with France's Finest, which combines a river cruise in the south and in the north. We have now a winter cruise called Christmas on the Seine, and then we have a Paris to Prague cruise called Cities of Lights. And finally, we have Paris to the Swiss Alps. That begins in Paris and ends in Zurich. So there's plenty of ways that you can arrive in Paris. And with all of the river cruises, we offer extensions that give you a few more days to explore semi-independently. We will guide you if you want, but you can also strike out on your own on these extensions. Next up, and I already touched on the Seine as the river cruise in northern France. At the just to the to the southwest of the mouth of the Seine are the Normandy beaches, and the Normandy beaches are best experienced through, if you will, a combination of just the beaches themselves, which bear silent testimony, and then the museums that are lined along the entire Normandy coast. There are quite a few of them, and we pick out the ones that we believe tell the best stories pertinent to our audience. As you can imagine, we have a tour that focuses primarily on the North American beaches, and we have a tour that focuses on the Commonwealth beaches. The Commonwealth Beach Tour, for instance, visits the Pegasus Museum that has as its focal point the Pegasus Bridge, which was very, very important in the pre-dawn hours of July 6th, of D-Day. We also take you to the memorial in Cannes, the Memorial Museum, which places the events of D-Day in the wider context of global conflict. And there is a small museum also in Arromanches that most people visit. That is really just, if you will, a traditional military museum, in that it has these dioramas of battlefields and really explains step by step how exactly the battle enrolled. From there, and again, this is for the France's finest itineraries and for Paris in the heart of Normandy. From the coast of Paris, we now move on and we end up in Berlin. And in Berlin, we visit that city at the beginning of Elbe cruises, and there are two of those. There is a Christmas version, and there is a, if you will, a standard year-round version. And we also visit Berlin as part of our Viking Homelands cruise on ocean itineraries. And Viking Homelands is probably one of our, it's really one of our staple itineraries. And Berlin plays a pivotal role in that one. What you see there in that slide is the East Side Gallery. It's part of the Berlin Wall that has been painted by a host of various different artists, and it's an open air, if you will, an open air art museum. At the core of your museum experience, if you will, in Berlin is what the Germans call the Museumsinsel, the museum island. Through Berlin runs a small little river, the Spire, and that meanders through the heart of the city. And in one of those meanders, it gets so, the Spire splits into channels, and in the middle of the river, you have this island. It's very well connected. It's not very isolated. It's very well connected with all kinds of bridges. It makes for a really interesting just walk around, because there's water everywhere, and then you climb up and down these bridges. There's monumental buildings, and there's 5 museums there. My favorite there is the Pergamon Museum. The Germans also at one point were a colonial power, but not just that. They had some of the greatest early archaeologists that worked in Turkey, that worked in what is now Iran, that worked in what is now Iraq. And they brought an awful lot of what they found there back to Germany, and you can visit that now in these museums. Incidentally, the Germans are also among the European nations that are furthest along on the path of perhaps returning some of this art to the places that it came from, and they're very careful in doing so. They talk with the, if you will, the countries that the art came from. It's quite an interesting development. Another small museum that is dedicated to the history of the Cold War is the house at Checkpoint Charlie, das Haus am Checkpoint Charlie. And that, of course, just tells the history of a divided Berlin, of how it was to go through, through these checkpoints in the middle of the city. When I was a teenager in school, I did that, and it was a really interesting and somewhat unnerving experience to have such a military presence in the middle of a normal city. And then from Berlin now, forgive me if we induce a little bit of a whiplash, but now we're moving back to the very far west of Germany, right on the border of France, where the Rhine more or less forms the border between the two countries. And just a little bit to the north of where the Rhine really then becomes the border is the city of Spire. And Spire is historically a very, very important city, as one of the cities that had an imperial cathedral. It is also, and I've never quite found out why that is, but it's also home to one of the great technology museums in Germany. And this is great for anyone that likes things on wheels, things on tracks, things that go into space, things that fly, or things that go underwater. So you can climb into a submarine. You can look at a Russian version of the space shuttle. There are hundreds of cars. There are all manners of machines. There is an organ that allegedly is the largest mechanical organ in the world. and it's vast. It's really big. It's great for anyone. If you have an engineering background, it is kind of like a gargantuan candy store, if you will. So that's Spire, and then we move on. And now I will hand over my microphone to Leah, because from Spire again, the title of this one is Museums Across the World, and we are crisscrossing the world. From Spire, we end up in Porto. Leah.
Good evening. And Porto and our Portugal's River of Gold sailing. Porto is not only home to myself, which it is, but also home to many concert halls, theaters, galleries, and museums. Amongst them, we decided to highlight a couple, namely Soares dos Reis National Museum. I'll say the name slowly because Portuguese is a little tricky on the tongue. But in the Soares dos Reis National Museum, we display Portuguese art from the past 5 centuries. The museum is located within the Carrancas Palace, an 18th century building, and also worth a visit just for itself. The palace is very nice to visit. Also worth of note is the Museum of Contemporary Art, curated by the Serralves Foundation, with some fantastic exhibitions from all around the world. Standout pieces include the Portuguese pop art-inspired paintings of Sá Nogueira, pieces by Lisbon-based sculptor José Pedro Croft, and the experimental video work of Alexandre Estrela. The Museum of Contemporary Art also houses temporary exhibitions by the leading Portuguese artists, so there's always something new to see and learn about Portuguese culture and history. Moving on to Lisbon, which is capital of Portugal, but also featured on the River of Gold sailing. We have the opportunity to explore many more museums. Lisbon as a capital features over 60 museums with diverse topics and featuring a little bit of everything from Portuguese culture and traditions. We could start by mentioning the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation, which houses the private collection of Calouste Sarkis Gulbenkian, a British Armenian businessman and philanthropist that made Lisbon its home and decided to dedicate his art collection, vast art collection, to the city. The building was designed to stay in harmony with the surrounding park and gardens, and some of its most important sections are on Egyptian art, Greco-Roman art, European paintings, and it has a beautiful area dedicated to the jewelry of René Lalique. And also, of course, it features many sculptures, furniture, and tapestry that have been part of Portuguese tradition, and also that he has collected throughout the world. On to the Maritime Museum, which can be visited on the Cosmopolitan Lisbon and Maritime Museum excursion. Usually, to begin with the tour, you will enter the Geronimus Monastery through the West Wing, which goes directly into the Maritime Museum. And then you will hear and learn all about the Golden Age of Discovery, just 500 years in the past, but we did have it. And you'll learn and see replicas and also still originals from Portuguese caravels when we sailed to search the New World. You'll be able to view naval exhibits, including the ceremonial barges from the 18th century and the royal cabin from the Queen Amelia in the 19th century yachts, which also transported the Portuguese royal family to the exile in 1910. After that, you'll be able to just take a stroll through the many displays of maritime artifacts. There are replicas of maps showcasing the caravels from the 16th century discoveries, wooden figurines from the Archangel Raphael that Vasco da Gama took on his voyage to India. So plenty to see and do in Lisbon. This is just some of the museums we highlighted for you today.
Are we in Amsterdam, Leah?
We are in Amsterdam, your home, yes.
Okay, so in Amsterdam there are a lot of museums, but generally visitors from abroad will go for one of two, and really, you need to do both. You need to do both. Essentially, the Rijksmuseum is a treasure trove of all Dutch art through the centuries. It has the Night Watch, which is Rembrandt's most famous painting. It's huge, but it also has a lot of great works by other famous Dutch artists, such as Vermeer, Potter, and Potter is probably better known in the Netherlands than he is abroad, but he was one of the greats. Frans Hals, of course, a contemporary of Rembrandt, who a lot of Dutch people actually like a little bit better because he was, you know, he made a lot of paintings of very jolly people, people that were sometimes maybe a little drunk. They're very, very happy paintings that he does. And all of this is mixed in, all this art is mixed in with historical artifacts that kind of portray the era in which the art was produced. And in my mind, that always makes it very, very interesting. The other museum in Amsterdam, it's right next door, it's literally like a 10-minute walk, is the Van Gogh Museum. And that is the world's largest collection of paintings by Vincent van Gogh, as the Dutch call him. I don't think that that's necessarily what should attract you there. What is interesting in this museum is that it tells you the entire story of Vincent, how he came to painting, how he started off with these really dark paintings of Dutch peasants that ate potatoes, had nothing else to eat, to these incredibly exuberant sunflowers from southern France, and then his darker work again just before he passed away. It's a museum that is really not just dedicated to the man's art, but to the man. And that, I think, is just such a wonderful combination. It's so well done that I absolutely think that you must see both. Don't you dare skip one of them. Okay, on to, entirely logically from the Netherlands, we now go to Bangkok. And in Bangkok, we highlight two things. So Bangkok is a rather crazy amalgam of modern and very stately and ornate, palatial, and markets and people living on boats and things like that. So it's a somewhat bewildering but beautiful city. And what we want to highlight is the Imperial Palace that you see here in this slide. That is obviously a museum. It's accessible to the public, and it is filled with art from centuries of culture of Thai culture. And then there is a second museum, the Prasart Museum, which is more of a traditional. It's in a regular building that also chronicles centuries of Southeast Asian art, primarily, of course, Thai art, but it strays a little bit here and there. Between those two, if you can manage to squeeze these two in a full day in Bangkok, you will really have a very good idea of Thai culture and Thai art. And now, of course, logically from Bangkok, we go straight to Stockholm in Sweden. And the Swedes were a seafaring nation. They had, obviously, it was a Viking country. And as time progressed, as time wore on into the early 17th century, the Swedes were still a seafaring nation, but sometimes things would go wrong. And sometime in that year, a fantastic royal vessel set out to sail and travel the oceans of the world, and it sank before it really had left Stockholm harbor. It sank and it got coated in mud, and it was rediscovered centuries later, perfectly preserved, and that is probably the best museum in Stockholm, the Vasa Museum. The ship is called the Vasa, and it is remarkably preserved. That's one thing that you can do. There is a museum dedicated to, here's the Vasa, by the way. The wood carvings on this ship are exquisite, and it's just so amazing that it is so well preserved. We have a little video also of Stockholm, and that gives you a little bit of a moving image. And then I'll talk about two other museums that you can find in the Swedish capital. James, take it away.
Nestled amid sparkling waters on 14 islands is vibrant Stockholm. Its impressive architecture and colours beaming a welcome invitation. Stockholm rose to prominence in the 17th century and has left a fascinating trail of history in its wake, all just waiting to be explored. One stop you should make is at the Vasa Museum. It houses a medieval warship that sailed just once. Her immaculate detailing and armament caused Vasa to be so top-heavy that she managed to sail just 1,400 yards and then sank into history. Or head to the heart of Gamla Stan for the beautiful Nobel Museum. It's been said the museum is a caretaker of history, chronicling some of the most powerful events, people, and inventions of our time. And all the winners are here too, gliding on a conveyor belt through the museum. For something different, take in Stockholm by water. Nearly 30% of this metropolis is made up of waterways. And the abundant coastline serves up a never-ending collage of breathtaking views. You can enjoy an entirely different perspective by paddling Stockholm's tranquil waterways through the heart of the city. A fun alternative is the ice bar, where the entire setting is created using 40 to 50 tons of crystal clear ice from the pure waters of one of Europe's pristine rivers. Or head out to the country to explore Sigtuna. In the 13th century, this quaint town was actually the most important city in Sweden. Nearby Skokloster Slott holds quite a secret. Parts of it were actually never finished. The palace does, however, own an impressive collection of medieval weaponry. Stockholm is a wonderful mosaic of natural beauty, fascinating history, and timeless traditions. We look forward to sharing with you Stockholm's many treasures.
Okay, I was going to mention two other museums, but the Nobel Museum is in the little video, actually. The one museum I think I must mention is the ABBA Museum. ABBA is the Swedish 1970s and 80s pop group that took the world by storm. Movies were made about their music. And if you go there, you find all kinds of things, memorabilia, of course, about the group, but you can also sing along with ABBA's favorite tunes, or most popular tunes. I did not want you to miss out on that if you're going to Stockholm. And now we are in the Monk Museum. As a matter of fact, this slide is of the old Monk Museum because a new Monk Museum has been in the works now for the last years, and it's recently opened. On Friday, we have a video, we have an episode on Viking.TV about the new museum, which you must watch because it's such an interesting story about how the museum was built, and then they had to bring in the art with partially with helicopters, because some of the works that Munch did are so large. Munch, of course, is the preeminent painter in all of Norway. And Viking has a very special relationship with the museum. We take our guests behind the scenes there, where you get to see the work that the curators do. And the other part is Munch made a series of murals in the aula of the University of Oslo. Now, those are not accessible to the public, only on rare occasions. But these are very, very monumental works. And we have an agreement with the University of Oslo that allows us to use these murals in our own aula on our expedition ships. So remember that you will see those very murals or replicas thereof in our aula on the expedition ships. And this is has everything to do, of course, with us having a relationship with not just the university, but also the Monk Museum. So on Friday night, you can check that out and watch more of it. We continue on with other museums in Oslo, because we've arrived in Oslo, of course. The Monk Museum, I'm sorry, I didn't say that. But the Monk Museum is not in Stockholm, it's in Oslo, the Norwegian capital. And Viking obviously has a very special relationship with all things Norwegian, and especially with all things that have to do with ships and discovery and exploration. And in Oslo, there is a small peninsula just south of the main city that you can travel to either by ferry or by bus. But the ferry ride back to the old city is gorgeous. On a nice day, you have the best views over all of Oslo. And we take you there on an excursion that visits some of the museums that are dedicated to seafaring and exploration. There is the museum that houses the Fram, the ship that Roald Amundsen took to the South Pole, or to Antarctica, really. Not all the way to the South Pole, of course. A ship that was originally built by Fridtjof Nansen, another famous Norwegian explorer. Next door to it is a museum that houses the raft that Thor Heyerdahl built, the Kon-Tiki. And right across the street from that is a museum that is just dedicated to shipping in general in Norway. And of course, it's a country that has such a long coastline that seafaring is in the Norwegian DNA, very much so. Right off the bat, the famous Norwegian, the Viking Ship Museum will be closed until 2016. It's going to be enormous. It's going to be a museum where so much of Viking history is brought together that it will become by far the most preeminent museum on Viking history in the world. But you'll have to wait for it a little bit and perhaps come back to Oslo. Oslo can be visited on some of our cruises, Viking Shores and Fjords, but also any cruise that begins in Bergen. So that is, for instance, Into the Midnight Sun, the Northern Lights cruises, the Viking Homelands. You can extend your cruise by taking a train ride from Bergen to Oslo across one of the most scenic parts of southern Norway, and spend 2 nights in Oslo and do a lot of. Here, what you see here is a picture of Vigeland Park, which is just outside of the old city center, a park that was completely shaped by Norway's most famous sculptor, Gustav Vigeland. And his statues are all over, his sculptures are all over this park. There's also beautiful views from it. It sits a little higher than the city. So that is an absolute must when you're in Oslo. Even when the weather's not so great, I would still do it. And then we now move from Oslo all the way to the north of Norway, to the other side of that coastline. Really, if you think about it, this is thousands of miles away as the ship would cruise. Tromso is in the northernmost part of the country, and what you see here is an image of the Polar Museum. Now, obviously, Tromso is at the very northern tip, so it was always a jump-off point for a lot of Arctic exploration. But it also houses the Polar Institute of Norway that has a lot to do with Antarctic exploration as well. Norway has always had great interest, obviously, in places that were far away and icy and cold, because that's kind of, when you're that far north in Europe, it's what you're used to. So there's always been great interest in Antarctica in Norway as well. And the Polar Museum combines these two icy worlds. It's a museum that kind of sits at the end of Norway, but it's really quite surprisingly interesting. So that's pretty much a must when you make it all the way out to Tromso. From Tromso, of course, nothing makes more sense than to go right to Rome. And what you see here in this slide is, of course, St. Peter. The best thing to do when you're with Viking in Rome is to see that you get booked on the Vatican city tours that take place before and after the big crowds come. They sell out. You need to be kind of early, but to walk through the Vatican Museum with a relatively few, and it's relative because the museum is it's never quiet in these museums, but it sure is easier to navigate before and after normal closing hours. What you see here next is, of course, the Sistine Chapel. That's part of your Vatican experience. If you see the Vatican Museum, this is kind of where it ends, if you will. This is where the tour through the museum ends. And you can either do that on a stopover, where you know our ships dock in Civitavecchia and we take you into Rome for the day. Better yet, if you have a journey that begins in Rome, book 2 nights as an extension, and you have a lot more time to spend in Rome than on that one day that your cruise visits, and that's a good thing. I think you should do that. you need a lot of time in Rome. What you see here, by the way, is the Neptune fountain, and it's not the Trevi fountain. It's the Neptune fountain, and not far from there, they still have a cafe that has the best tartufo in Rome. Remember that. And then from Rome, this is actually quite close by. I know that we've been taking you all over the globe in breakneck speed, but this is not that far. Just north of Rome is Tuscany, and these images are from Florence. When the Renaissance swept all over Italy, Florence was really the hub. And this was because there was an awful lot of money in Florence. Very rich merchants, families of merchants lived in Florence that invested in the arts, that invested also in, did a fair deal of conquering the world, if you will, through their mercantile empires, and wanted to show off their wealth. And so they had money to commission great works of art. And what you see here, of course, on the right-hand side is Michelangelo's David. And on the right-hand side, that is a ceiling image of the Uffizi Gallery. The Uffizi and the Accademia galleries are the two most famous museums in Florence. And again, this is one of those where you might just want to pace yourself and pick one or the other. I leave it up to you, but it's a hard job to do both of them, I think. Finally, if you're interested more in something that is not dissimilar to what I described in Amsterdam, where in the Van Gogh Museum you get a sense of the man and you get a sense of his work, there is a Da Vinci Museum, a museum dedicated to Leonardo da Vinci, that is much more about the man's brain than about his artistic output. It's not so much an art museum as it is a museum that takes you into the mind of the greatest innovator and the greatest artist of the Renaissance. The man who kind of is who's the original Renaissance man, the man who was curious about everything, who tried everything, who worked in mathematics, who made fine art, who worked in physics, who basically had an insatiable appetite to learn. And there's another Leonardo museum in Milan. They're always wonderful places to just explore the man's incredible mind. Okay, and then finally, after we're now leaving Florence, we find ourselves in Greece, in Athens. And what you see here is an image of the Archaeological Museum, the National Archaeological Museum. In Athens, if you've never been, there are 3 things that you must do. And I'll have a caveat on one of them. If you have trouble walking or climbing, the Acropolis may be best enjoyed from a bit of a distance. You can have a splendid view without making it all the way up, because it is a climb, and what's left of the Greek causeway up to the Temple Mount is not, in the 21st century, it's not that great. So it's a little uneven. It's a little bit of a climb, but essentially the three things in my mind in Athens are the National Archaeological Museum, very big. Again, focus on a handful of things. Don't try to see it all. Then there is the Acropolis itself, and at the bottom of the Acropolis hill, there is the new Acropolis Museum. And all of these things are offered in shore excursions. But the new Acropolis Museum, if you need to drop if you're good to walk, and you need to drop any of the three, drop the National Archaeological Museum, because the Acropolis Museum plus the Acropolis itself, that is a winning combo. That gives you such an incredible sense of, once you've done those two, you will feel like you have really seen the Acropolis. You've really understood what it used to look like, because a lot of the artwork that was removed from the Acropolis, from the temples on the Acropolis, is now in that museum. If you have quite a bit of extra time still, and maybe you've been there, there's a very interesting little museum that we have a special connection with, and we take you on a special visit to the Nelson collection of the Lascaris Museum, or the Lascaris Foundation. It's not called museum, but it is a museum. It houses the history of naval history in Greece. And of course, the Greeks are great seafarers, and it's something that is also in the Greek DNA to a very high degree. And Horatio Nelson was just someone that, as an admiral, was a character of great interest to the founders of this foundation, who collected over the years, a lot of artifacts of Lord Nelson that you can now find there. And it's a small place. It's often overlooked, but we take you there because we have a special relationship with the foundation. And I think here's a final slide that shows you the Acropolis Museum. See, and there you see these marble panels. There's some missing, and that's exciting too. I just read something about the Elgin marbles that may perhaps be back on their way to Athens from the British Museum one day in the future. The newspaper article reported some breakthroughs there, so who knows? This concludes it. And so now we are wide open for your questions, and Kira is going to ask the questions, and Leah and I are going to do our very best to answer them all.
Hi both, how are you doing? So we're going to start with a couple comments before we go into the questions. We have a few hellos. We have a hello from David Thomas. Hello all from the lovely Viking Neptune sailing the Atlantic north of Cape Verde. And we also have a hello from Marilyn, who says hello. So our first question is from Patricia McLean from Montgomery in the US. She says, if you only have time to visit one museum in Paris, which museum would be better to visit? The Musée d'Orsay or the Louvre?
Leah, will let you answer too, but I would go for the Musée d'Orsay. I'll tell you why. If you are on a Seine River cruise, it's great fun to look at at all the Impressionist paintings in the Musée d'Orsay, because the Seine was really where these Impressionist paintings found a lot of their inspiration. So you can see the paintings in the museum and then retrace retrace your journey if you do it at the end, or have a sense already if you do it at the beginning. So I would pick the d'Orsay Museum. Yes. Lena, what do you think?
I would say it will depend if you're coming back to Paris, if this is your first visit and you just want to really mark off the highlights. I have to say that when I visit the Louvre, it was a wow experience for me. So I'm sure that anyone that hasn't been to Paris and really wants to see the landmarks, if you will, then the Louvre would be it. But if you're a return visitor, then the d'Orsay has more to offer, if you would.
Okay. There you have it, a split vote.
Thank you. So next question. It's from Delphina in the US again. And she says, my husband and I are very interested in doing the City of Lights river journey. We've always wanted to go to Paris and see all the art there. If we wanted a guided tour of the museums, would a Viking guide be able to show us around, or is this something we would have to arrange ourselves?
Nope, we can. So you will spend 2 nights in Paris before you travel to the ship, or you can also do 2 nights. You can add an extra 2 nights, and I don't think that's a luxury to have 4 nights in Paris. And you have a local host there who can help you set this up. Yeah, and part of the day that's already part of the journey, so that's not as the extra 2 nights that you can book, but part of that your Paris stay as part of the cruise, if you will. You have an opportunity to just book a tour of the Louvre.
Great, thank you. So our next question is from Joanne, and she says, hi both, nice to see you again. I know that the museums in Paris are very popular. Do they ever book up? Would we need to book in advance of the cruise to assure we can go?
No. All that you need to do is if you already know your plans, and if some of it is things that you want to do on your own, I would do the research a little bit ahead of time, and possibly get an entrance ticket ahead of time. It just it saves a little bit of time. It's not like you will not get in, but it saves you a little bit of time if you're on your own. And I described this with the Musée d'Orsay. If you have a Paris card, it's just a lot easier. You cut the line.
Great, thank you. So we have a question from Suzanne from Essex, who says, I was particularly interested by the museums in Berlin, Amsterdam, and Normandy. Is there one itinerary that goes to all these places?
One itinerary that goes to all of them? No. You can do. You have an itinerary that goes along you have an ocean cruise that goes along the western coast of Europe, and that does stop in Amsterdam, and it stops in Louvre, where you can do the Normandy beaches. But you cannot combine that with Berlin. No, you'll have to cruise a little bit more.
Maybe they could book 2 cruises and then just start with the Amsterdam that goes to Warnemünde.
Yes. There's a very long what you like to call a combo voyage that will take you to all 3. I need to. Do you know off the top of your head what that's called?
I don't, but I can find it quickly.
You're going to find it, and I'll answer the question. Go ahead, Kira. We'll find it.
Great. So our next question is from Don from the US, who says, will the new Egyptian Museum be open and part of our tour in April? We are scheduled on the Pharaoh and Pyramids tour for the first part of April 2020.
Okay. The answer is probably, and this requires a little bit of explanation. The new Egyptian Museum is a project that is so incredibly important to Egypt as a country It's such a monumental thing that the Egyptian government struggles with finding just the right time. They want it to be just so. They want everything to be perfect. And they have had a hard time saying, okay, this is when we do this. This is when we open. It's a project that has a lot of engagement from, if you will, the political world. And any museum that is such a vast undertaking, there are delays in construction, there are delays in bringing the artifacts all where they need to be, there is political bickering, and that's why it's been taking a lot longer than initially anticipated. But by April of next year, it should be done, yes. Yeah, it should be open. And then we'll take you there. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Joost. So the next question is from Sheila, and she asks, on the Mediterranean Odyssey journey, we stop in Florence. There are so many great museums and galleries to see here. Is there time to do more than one in a day?
Yeah. You can do the ones that we mentioned. You can do them if you have a full day. You're going to be tired, but yeah, you can absolutely do that. Yeah. It doesn't take very long to get from the port to Florence, and you can spend the day there, the better part of the day there. Leah, have you found the itinerary yet?
It will be a combination with the trade routes of the Middle Ages and the Viking homelands.
All right, there we go. That will allow you to see Berlin and Amsterdam and the Normandy beaches.
Great, thank you both for finding that. So on to our next question. It's from Holly, and Holly asks or says, the museum island looks like a brilliant excursion. We are traveling on the Elegant Elbe itinerary in April, which goes to Berlin. I've heard it is very cold in the winter. Would we need lots of layers when we are there? We don't want to freeze on the museum island.
In April, you do need to bring, and I'm entirely serious about this, you just bring a set of thermal underwear. It might be a great spring, and it may not be such a great spring. Berlin sits on a plain, on the North German plain, and the winds come in from the north, sometimes from the east, and it can in April it can be bitterly cold. But it could also be, depending on where the weather is coming from, it can be relatively mild. Be prepared. Carry layers.
Right, well, sticking on the theme of the weather, we have a question from Keegan, who asks, when is the best time of the year to go to Normandy?
Sorry, Carrie, we didn't hear that. To the Normandy beaches?
To Normandy.
To Normandy. Year round, as long as we cruise there, I would probably not do it in winter, and that's just because the days get short and you need a lot of time there. And interestingly, avoid June 6th, D-Day, because it gets so busy that the beaches get closed off sometimes. So that if you had that idea, if you're sitting there puzzling to figure out, don't. It's not a good idea. We've actually in the past sometimes rerouted the cruises if they would fall over June 6th to, we would shuffle our itinerary around to be in the Normandy beaches on June 5th, because that's the only day of the year where it's virtually impossible. I would go in May. May's beautiful in that part of the world. Everything is green, the cows are out, the calves are out. That's when I would go.
Great, thank you, Joost. So here we have a question from Lexi in San Francisco. And Lexi says, hi there. My partner and I are looking for a quieter experience on the ship. How many passengers are on the river cruise ships, and how does this compare to the ocean journeys?
The river cruise ships have a maximum capacity of 190, which is, it's small enough. And I think what I really like about our ships, that goes for the ocean ships too, by the way. The ocean ships carry 930 guests, but you wouldn't be able to tell when you're on board, because we have so much public space where you can curl up with a book or just, disappear for a little bit. Outside of just your own stateroom, there's plenty of space to just have a quiet conversation with 2 or 3 people, sit there and read a book, put on earbuds and listen to music. That's kind of what the ships are for. We intentionally designed them to not have a crowded feel.
Great, thank you. And we have a similar question from Marianne, also in the US, who says, can you tell us a bit about the experience on the river ships whilst we're on board? We have done an ocean itinerary before where there are so many things to do on the ship. This would be our first time on a river cruise. And what are the key differences?
Okay. The difference mainly is that on an ocean voyage, you will every once in a while spend an entire day at sea. So the ship has to offer a number of things to keep you engaged and entertained while you sail across the seas. On rivers, you will get off the ship every day, and in most places, sometimes you get off the ship twice a day, and in most places you spend the better part of the day there. So the cruising that happens, there are some particularly scenic parts of rivers where you cruise during the day, but quite often you do a lot of cruising early in the morning when you wake up and you have your breakfast, or in the late afternoon when you're done with the day, and let's say at 4 o'clock you start sailing and it's all beautiful and relaxing and very zen. The river ships are quieter, and that's just a matter of what are the facilities. You have one lounge and you have one restaurant. We often offer lectures, both done by ship staff or by external lecturers. We offer some local destination performances. In the different countries, you'll have people come on board that might play French or might present French chansons, or they will do some traditional Hungarian music. We also offer some cooking classes, and cooking classes is more of a cooking demonstration. You can't really do classes on the river ships, but you can learn about various different foods and how they're prepared. So there's enough things to do, but it is relatively quiet. We encourage people to spend as much of their time as they can off the ship on river ships. Do the same on ocean, but on ocean we know that you have a little bit more time to spend on the vessel itself.
Great, thank you. We have a few more questions about an ocean ship now, or ocean voyages. So this one's from Joanna in the US. And she says, I've booked to go on the Empires of the Mediterranean itinerary, and I want to do the excursion to visit the Acropolis Museum. It looks amazing. But we're still undecided whether we should choose this tour. Would we need to book this before we embark on our journey, or can we sign up for this whilst we're on the ship?
Leah?
So we showcase the Acropolis on our included tour. So of course you will always find space if you do decide to book at the last minute. If you're looking at some of the more in-depth optional tours that we offer to the Acropolis, then I would encourage you to book ahead of time, just because space runs out. And we do want to confirm that space to our suppliers ahead of time. But if you're looking at the included tour, then of course your space is always guaranteed.
Great, thank you. Our next question is from Zachary in Denver, and he says, my wife and I want to go on the Viking homelands journey to do the Bergen Railway tour in Oslo. It seems breathtaking. There seems to be 2 pre-extension options, one for 2 nights and one for 4. Which would you recommend? We can't decide.
Leah, what do you think?
Well, Yost created the 4 nights, so I think the answer is going to be clear. It's all really up to how much time you want to spend away. Of course, if you add 4 nights to already a long cruise, but if you have the time to be away, the 4 nights is really the option that will give you the more time to explore and actually soak in the destination. That would be my suggestion.
Great, thank you. So we have a question from Alyssa as well in Illinois, and she asks, are there any times of the year where tours of the museums in Europe are more or less busy or expensive?
Yeah. Traditionally, July and August are very busy. September, shoulder season is kind of April, May, but you have in April and May, obviously at some point you have Easter, which is a big holiday in much of Europe. So if you are entirely flexible in your planning, I would literally sit there with the European calendar, figure out when Easter is, and go around. Avoid Easter, but do it early in the season. Just because the weather is nice. Fall has its own charm, and you can. I mean, if really your goal is to spend a lot of time indoors, you can do it in winter. Rome may not be great in winter from a point of view of walking around and experiencing the great outdoors and sitting on a terrace, but certainly it's the very best time of year to see any of the museums.
Great, thank you. So our next question is from Katerina, and she said, I would love to go to see the museums in Bangkok. What is the best time of year to book this journey? We want to get the best weather while we're there.
Southeast Asia it gets, from a climate point of view, gets fairly unbearable at times, and you will find that we only have a handful of cruises that go there during the season, and you can pick any of those, because we expressly try to avoid when it becomes a little too hot to handle. You can pick any of them, really.
Great, thank you. And then Lorenzo in Philadelphia says, my wife and I are looking at booking a European cruise for next year. We would like to go when the season is a bit quieter. When would you recommend?
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit. Leah, what do you think?
March to April, and then October, November. I think those would be my my best guess. Of course, if you're not afraid of a little rain, December and January are also very nice, and you're guaranteed to have far less crowds as you try to explore.
Great, thank you. And now we have a question from Mika, who says, can you tell me a bit more about the Mississippi riverboat?
Hi, Mika. I just was in the U.S. to look after our Mississippi project a little bit. It's a really interesting part of the world. It's we started domestic cruising a little bit with our expedition ship in the Great Lakes last year, and we've now added cruising on the Mississippi, and there's an awful lot to see. It's I would say that the southern part is very much about history and the towns that you visit, the plantation homes. You go to the Vicksburg battlefield, you visit New Orleans, and in the northern part of the river, so in Iowa and in Wisconsin and in Minnesota, the river itself is, and I have to say, that was a bit of a revelation. I traveled a lot in the US, but not so much on the river itself. But the river between St. Paul and St. Louis is absolutely spectacular. It can hold its own with some of the great rivers in Europe. So I'd recommend it. especially that northern part. I was really pleasantly surprised at how how beautiful it is. Ship is great. We have a lot of entertainment on the ship. We have a lot of musical, local musical enrichment. That's I think a very, very nice touch. Yeah, it's good.
Great, thank you. And we've got a final few questions left. One from Julia, who says, "Hi, Joost and Leah. A question for you both. Out of all the itineraries that you briefly discussed, which post-extension stays would you recommend the most?"
I need to leaf through this almost. I would definitely spend more time in Paris than you have on any of our voyages, just because it's such a great city. I also think, though, that in Athens, we have an extension that covers a little bit of the surrounding areas. That's very popular, and it's so a lot of people book this, and the people that do book it are really happy. It's one of our highest rated extensions. So if we keep it short, I'll vote for those two. Leah, do you have anything to add?
I will go a little off script. So if we're talking about post extensions and pre extensions that have fabulous museums, I would probably go for Madrid, which includes, of course, the Prado Museum, a must see, and then some extra time in London. You could get in the Victoria and Albert Museum. You can get in British History Museum. There's just so many to see there. So it's those are two, of course, very, very good destinations.
I will second that. Yeah.
Great, thank you both. So I think we don't have any more questions as of yet, but I think a nice way to end would be a comment from Ruth in the US, who says, "Bravo, you are both doing such a great job of educating and inspiring. Thank you."
Thank you. And thank you for watching, and see you sometime soon on another Wanderlust Wednesdays.